Hey boys and girls, wow, I can't believe that this is our 6th week of distance learning. I'm so proud of how much work each of you has put into Chapter 5 so far. So just a quick recap for our weeks in this term. In week 1, we reviewed integers. In week 2, we introduced ratios, which is a comparison of two numbers that has similar units. In week 3, we continued finding equivalent ratios on MobyMax using tables. In week 4, we finished off ratio tables on big ideas. Last week, we focused on rates, which are ratios that compare two numbers that have different units. And then this week, we're moving on to learning about percents. Now, you've been using percentages since first grade. If we have a quiz that contains 20 questions and you get 18 correct, you wouldn't expect to see an 18 at the top of your paper when you get it back. You would expect to see 90%. The way that we arrive at that grade is by dividing 18 by 20 and then multiplying by 100, because percent means per 100. In essence, we're finding equivalent ratios where the whole number of the second ratio is 100. So if we look over here, if we have 18 out of 20, to figure out what the percent is, we need to see what number needs to go at the top of this fraction out of 100. So since 20 times 5 equals 100, to figure out this number, we say 18 times 5 equals 90, which is how we arrive at 90%. So, when you're watching this video, there is a link on my page to get to some worksheets. If you are able to get onto the worksheets, that is wonderful, and it'll give you something to look at while I'm going through this. But if not, have a piece of paper, take down some notes. You can pause and rewind and everything. So just do the best you can, and let's learn about these things called percents. Okay, introduction. What is a percent? A percent is a part to whole ratio where the whole is 100. So you can write a percent as a fraction with a denominator of 100. So 60% is 60 out of 100. So we say 60 per 100, or 60 parts out of 100. So if we want 25%, we can say 25 out of 100. 7% would be 7 out of 100. So if you have 100%, you have a whole, or 1. The meaning of a word, percent, means per 100. Just some other words that use that word cent. A century is 100 years. A cent, or a penny, is 1/100th of a dollar. In Mexico, a centavo is 1/100th of a peso. So now we need to learn the connection between ratios, fractions, percents, and decimals. They are all equivalent. So in this table at the bottom of the page, it shows if you have a ratio of 1 to 4, if you write it as a fraction out of 100, 4 times 25 equals 100, so 1 times 25 equals 25. To go from fraction to percent, if you get it out of 100, the numerator becomes your percent, so you have 25%. And if we do a decimal, if we change it from here, if you say 25 divided by 100, you get 0.25. So, our first lesson, writing percents as fractions or mixed numbers in simplest form. So the directions for this one say use a 10 by 10 grid to model the percent. So the first one we have is 35%. If we're going to use this to model 35%, if you look at the squares, you can see that there are 100 squares in there. So when we do this, you would color in 3 entire rows and then 5 squares on the next row. So that would be 35 out of the 100 squares. So our fraction would be 35 over 100. The decimal is 0.35. Now, 35 and 100 can both be divided by 5. So when you do that, you would get 7 out of 20. So our simplified fraction would be 7 over 20. Okay, for number 2, the second one is 100%. Now, 100% means I'm going to shade in 100 out of the 100 squares. So when I do that, my fraction will be 100 over 100, which equals 1. And my decimal would also equal 1. So if you have 100%, you're talking about the whole thing. If you're going to eat 100% of a candy bar, there's not going to be anything left over because you're going to eat all of it. And then the last one is 174%. Now, if you have a percent that's over 100, that means you're going to have an entire one plus part of this one. So for 174%, you would have 174 over 100, which the decimal for that would be 1.74. But then when we simplify it, 1 74 hundredths, and then 74 and 100 can both be divided by 2. So you would have 1 37 fiftieths. And that would be your final answer for letter C. Okay, the next part, it says write the percent as a fraction or a mixed number in simplest form. So for these 4, we start off with 5% for letter A. Now for that, I'm going to go from here, and I'm going to start off by saying 5 over 100 because 5% is 5 out of 100. But then both of those numbers can be divided by 5. I don't know if you can read that on my piece of paper, but that says divided by 5. And so my final answer will be 1/20th. The next question, letter B, is 168%. So 168% I would write as 168 over 100, which would simplify to 1 68 hundredths, and then 68 and 100 can both be divided by 4, so that would give us 1 17 25ths. On letter C, you have 36%, which is 36 out of 100, and you can divide 36 and 100 by 4, so you end up with the fraction 9/25. Then finally, letter D, 83% is 83 out of 100. That fraction cannot be simplified any further, and so that's as far as we go with that one. All right, second part of the lesson, writing a fraction as a percent. So there are 2 different methods. Method 1, we rewrite the fraction with a denominator of 100 to find the percent. How? Write the equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100, then write the numerator with the percent sign. So, letter A. I'm going to move down so you can't see the second row. if you have 12 20ths, if I multiply both of those numbers by 5, I get 60 out of 100, which means that my percentage for 12 over 20 is 60%. On letter B, I have 1/4. Now to change 4 to 100, I need to multiply times 25. So that means I'm going to multiply both of those by 25, and I get 25 over 100, which is 25%. Then the last one on that row, 15 out of 25. 25 times 4 equals 100, so 15 times 4 is 60, which means we have another 60%. Okay, then on our second row, we have 33 out of 50. Multiply 50 times 2 to get 100. So I need to multiply 33 times 2, so it'll be an equivalent fraction. So we get 66 out of 100, which means that that fraction represents 66%. Letter E, 2/5. 5 times 20 equals 100, so 2 times 20 equals 40, which means we have a percentage of 40%. And then letter F, 54 over 10. 10 times 10 equals 100. 54 times 10 equals 540. So that fraction would equal 540%. Okay. Then the next one, the next page, shows our second method. How do you find the percent of a fraction or mixed number if your denominator multiplied by a factor does not equal 100? So, for example, a drought affects 9 out of 12 Midwestern states. What percent of the Midwestern states are affected by that drought? So, within this method, there are two ways. First, if you write your fraction 9 out of 12, and then I simplify my fraction to see if I can find a denominator that can change to 100, that can multiply by a factor to equal 100. So if I divide both of these by 3, I end up with the fraction 3/4. So hopefully all of you can see that 9/12 and 3/4 are equivalent fractions. And then you can take this, take your simplified fraction, and create an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. So that's the same part as method 1. So multiply both of these times 25, because 4 times 25 equals 100, and my numerator becomes my percentage. And then method 3. Write your fraction. Change the fraction to a decimal using division. So 9/12, I can find its decimal by saying the numerator divided by the denominator. So 9 divided by 12 equals 0.75, and you should know that 0.75 is the same as 75 hundredths. That's how we read this decimal, 75 hundredths. Same way as we read that fraction. Step 3, change the decimal to a percent. So to change my decimal to a percent, all I need to do is multiply that decimal by 100. So 0.75 times 100 equals 75, and then add the percentage sign. So 75%. Or if you want to think about moving your decimal place, you can move your decimal 2 places to the right to change from a decimal to a percentage. So because of the 2 zeros in the 100, so 75, add the percent sign. 75%. So in both of those methods, this first question right here equals 75%. Okay, we have 2 more pages here. Okay, fractions, decimals, and percentages. So, example 1, write 36% as a fraction in its simplest form, then as a decimal. So 36% is the same as 36 over 100. Both of these numbers can be divided by 4, so we end up with the fraction 9 over 25. That's its fraction in simplified form. Okay, and then to change to a decimal, 36% is still 36 over 100, which 36 divided by 100 is 0.36. If you go from your fraction in simplified form, all you have to do is say 9 divided by 25. Both of these methods right here, both of these division problems, if you put those on your calculator, they will both give you 0.36 because this fraction and that fraction are equivalent. So they're going to have the same decimal. So 36 over 100 is the same thing as 9 over 25, which is the same thing as 0.36, which is the same as 36%. Okay, so let's do another example. In this one, we're going to change 75%. We're going to write it as a fraction in simplified form and as a decimal. So 75% is 75 hundredths. Both of these numbers can be divided by 25. 100 divided by 25 equals 4. 75 divided by 25 equals 3. So my fraction is 3/4. So you see we have 2 different fractions in our problem right now. We have 75 over 100 and 3/4. You can use either of those to figure out what your percentage as a decimal is. So if you say 75 divided by 100 or 3 divided by 4, both of those gives you 0.75 as your decimal. So 75 over 100 is the same thing as 3 over 4, which is the same thing as 75 hundredths as a decimal, which is the same thing as 75%. Then, note, to change the decimal back to a percent, there are 2 methods. First, you can multiply the decimal number by 100 and add the percent sign, or you can move your decimal 2 places because of the 2 zeros in the 100 to the right and add the percent sign. Now notice that is changing a decimal to a percent. So if you want to end up with a percent, you multiply by 100 or move the decimal 2 places to the right. Okay, our last work page. Hopefully these pieces of paper all stick with me and don't start moving too much. All right, so we have some practice problems now. So we are going to write the percent as a fraction or a mixed number in simplest form. So number 1, we have 20%. I'm going to start off by writing that percent over 100, and both of these numbers can be simplified by dividing by 20. If you don't divide by 20 the first time, that's fine. You could have divided by 2 and then divided by 10, or however you see, as long as your final fraction is in simplest form. So my final fraction would be 1/5. On number 2, 25%, I'm going to start off by saying 25 over 100. Both of those numbers can be divided by 25, and it finishes up as 1/4. Number 3, 65%. I'm going to start off by saying 65 over 100. Divide both of those by 5 and you get 13/20. Okay. Number 4, we have 44%. So I'm going to start off with 44 over 100. Both of those can be divided by 4, so I get 11/25. On number 5, I have 120%. So I have a number that's bigger than 100. So I start off same way, 120 over 100. Now this, I'm going to go on and change it to a mixed number. So 1 and 20/100ths. And then 20 and 100 can both be divided by 20. So I finish off with the mixed number 1 and 1/5. If you finished with 6/5, that would be fine also. Number 6, we have 250%. So 250 over 100, 2 and 50 over 100. So that would give us 2 and 1/2. Okay. We have number 7 and number 8 left. So, number 7, we have 9%. To write that fraction, we say 9 over 100. Those two numbers can't be divided by the same thing, so that is where it finishes. Then on number 8, we have 32%. So we would say 32 over 100. Both of those numbers can be divided by 4. So my final fraction is 8 over 25. All right. Write the fraction or mixed number as a percent. So instead of going this direction from the percent to the fraction, now we're going to go from the fraction to the percent. It says 2 methods. Remember, 2 methods. Make your denominator 100 or divide the decimals, then change to a percent. Now, not all percents, or not all fractions can change the denominator into 100. And so I'm going to use method 2 because each of you should have a calculator. And so doing that division shouldn't be too bad. Okay, let's see. So, with number 9, it says 6 over 25. So to change this, my first thing I would do, I would say 6 divided by 25. If you type that into your calculator, you get 0.24. And remember, to change a decimal to a percent, you multiply by 100. 0.24 times 100 just gives me 24%. Okay, number 10, we have 3/20, which means I'm going to say 3 divided by 20, which gives me 0.15. And if I change my decimal to a percent, I multiply by 100, so I get 15%. Then for number 11, 3/10. When I say 3 divided by 10, I get 0.3. When I multiply that times 100, I get 30%. Okay, number 12, 9 over 50. So when I say 9 divided by 50, I get 0.18. Then I multiply times 100, which gives me 18%. On number 13, it's 50 100ths, which means I say 50 divided by 100, and I get 0.5. Times 100 is 50%. Now on this one, you should have been able to go straight to the percent without even dividing, because our denominator is already 100. So our numerator should be what we get for our percentage. And then number 14, 2 6. Now this is an example of one of those. You cannot make 6 you can't make it turn into 100. So this one, you have to use this method. So you need to say 2 divided by 6, which gives you 0.333333333. When you're doing percents, when you're trying to change fractions into a percentage, if you get a long decimal like this, you need to keep at least 4 decimal places, because your final answer needs to have 2 decimal places. And if I multiply this times 100, I get 33.33%. So in order to keep those 2 decimal places when I get to my percentage, I need to make sure that I have enough decimal places in my decimal answer to create a percent that has 2 decimal places. So make sure you keep that in mind when you are working these problems. Now, on number 15 and 16, we have mixed numbers. When I am changing a mixed number into a percentage, you have 2 things you can do. You can either change it into an improper fraction, which would be 5 times 1, which is 5, plus 3. You would have 8 over 5. And then you can say 8 divided by 5 equals, and you would get 1.6. Times 100 is 160%. Or if you just pay attention to the fraction portion, so 3 divided by 5 equals 0.6 or 0.60. Times 100 is 60, but I still have that 1 out front. So since it's a mixed number, it's going to be 160%. And then on number 16, 2 and 4 25ths, you can either say 2 times 25 is 50, plus 4 equals 54, and say 54 divided by 25 equals 2.16. Or you can say 4 divided by 25 equals 0.16, and then when I make it into a percentage, 0.16 is 16%, but I still have that 2 out front, so it would be 216%. And then number 17, number cents. 2 stores sell their goods at the manufacturer's suggested retail price, so their prices are the same. Which store has the greatest markdown from their original pricing? So it says that Sam's has 1/4 off and Costco has 30% off. So in order to figure out which one has the greater markdown, we have to have them both the same. So you can either change the fraction into a percent, or you could change the percent into a fraction. I find it easier to compare percents, and so I'm going to change my Sam's fraction into a percentage. To do that, 1/4 is the same as 1 divided by 4, which is 0.25, which is 25%. So if Sam's has 25% off and Costco has 30% off, comparing those two, I see that Costco has the greatest markdown. Now, this week we have MobyMax, There are a few MobiMax exercises under percent, so when you get to it and it tells you that you have to do percents, then just work it until percents is finished. And then after that, there is a big ideas exercise. So work hard on those. Try to look at them before Wednesday, before our conference, so that you can come to our conference with any questions that you have about changing between percents, fractions, and decimals. I hope y'all are having a great week, and I will see you on Wednesday. Have a good day.